I would just like to share with you some of my works, because I think it will be easy for me to explain to you about narrative architecture through various representation techniques. I've been teaching design school in architecture, sorry, design studio in architecture school around KL for the past 5 years. As I think teaching is just came naturally to me. I just like being surrounded with people or students, and it kind of led me to open my own studio because I'm a bit obsessed with software. So this is just some of the pictures from my classes. Students are being very energetic to learn about new softwares. Just a little bit background on my education. I was actually graduated from Oxford School of Architecture. So I took advanced architecture design. I graduated diploma from UTM. So back then, architecture school was very straightforward, a bit rigid. As I was just suddenly exposed to these various techniques of representation technique, and with using different materials. For my final thesis, which my final year, I did a narrative and research-based design, where I had the chance to work with Dr. Yara Nasir, working in London. So this studio have a quite strong political architecture approach, and it was also a narrative-based research, which I think kind of influenced a lot my architecture style. I just find it very interesting to see how they come up with various techniques of representation technique. As a result, I sort of have like a collection of a book, like that I kind of like save it myself and have it compile the representation techniques that I kind of learned during my study days. So just to show, like, to maybe to just share how we could view narrative architecture through various representation techniques. So drawing as a discourse, because I think my final year thesis was actually 90% of it was hand drawn. So just a kind of all of the images in the slides are actually from my work. So drawing as a discourse, I think I always encourage students to just start sketching. Like just sketch whatever imagination that you have. It doesn't need to make sense. Because some ideas just starts crazy. So the trick is always to learn from a reference. From my point of view, I always learn from drawing that I like or maybe be inspired by, and have a butter paper and then just keep tracing it until I kind of develop my own language or style. So that is one of the I think, very easy trick that I always encourage students to try. I came out with this little sketch, and I always feel that the smallest sketch in your sketchbook is the most precious one, because it just shows that your initial idea, whenever that you're in a creative process, right? Your scribbles or your sketches, even this small of sketches, means a lot rather than the afterthought sketches. So this, as you can see here, is just a series of little sketches that I have in my sketchbook. And what I did was I always scan the sketches that I have and compile it in a document. I never thought that I could draw during my final year, but my tutor kind of like push me to draw. They just keep believing in me. They just keep pushing my ability, and I ended up drawing like, this really, not to say beautiful, but I can say of the originality. I'm very proud of it, because I can come out with something that from myself. Imaginative collage. I think this is quite a very famous technique as well among students, and I always encourage students to actually maximize your collage technique by having your own template. For example, like if for the human figure, right? I would just cut people that I feel that kind of relate to the project that I was going that was doing, and then if you have that series of textures, even plants, because I think that this kind of creates the originality in your work. It's not something that you just took from Pinterest or Google and then just have it there. So I always have this compiled, these templates of mine. So maybe if you want to try that, it's a good technique. So uh, collage is a very raw, for me, it's a very raw technique that shows your ideas. It can be really quick. It can be a combination of your line drawings. This is just my sketches of my thesis. So it was just a line drawing, and then I keep just having these textures that I was already imagining in my mind, and all these fabrics, and just the human figure with the color template. Art, you can't even describe it with words. Some art is just meant to just to view. So it goes as well for your architecture graphics, because all architecture has its own narrative. So I feel that you need to kind of like find your own the techniques that you're comfortable with. So for example, like this one is just a series of line drawings, and sometimes black and white drawings is just enough. Sometimes you just need to highlight things with a little bit of colors and images. Okay, digital dreaming. AAD Studio kind of like it doesn't make sense, when you get into the architecture studio, you just see these weird models here and there, and sometimes there's like people doing installation somewhere in the corner of the room. So for me, it's just really interesting. So I had the chance to learn about the software, so I call it digital dreaming, because I feel like when you have the ability to work with softwares, right, it just create boundless of um, imagination. You can just do whatever you want. So when we were given such freedom, we don't know where to start. So I started with 3D digital dreaming. So I just model everything that I have in mind. So this was just an exploration of design, sort of like a hanging garden for my muse. So it was a Ophelia hanging garden. So it was a very quite interesting experiment. Moving on, I think I also want to highlight about capturing moments, which is photography, in other words. So I also kind of use photography as a narrative exploration. Like for example, like this one, I was having an experiment on movement analysis. So I was trying to figure out how can I capture this movement analysis and then transfer it into an architectural narrative. So I have a really nice friend of mine to just it's about ablution, to just clean yourself up before your prayer, and this techniques kind of like have it really delicate, to see the movement and everything. So it was about the delicacy of prayer movement. Always find a way to just connect with architecture. There's always a way, okay? Traveling is also one of my favorite thing to do. So, and when I travel, I kind of go a little bit of dramatic. So all of this human figure in this photography is me myself. So like for example, like on the last slide in Cyprus, because my thesis was about women's space, and I was being a bit dramatic, and I saw this one really beautiful ruins. I was just like, can I just lay in the middle of that, and can you take a picture of me? And it turns out really beautiful. So it was a really good experience. And on the right side is actually one of my favorite came from Morocco. So poetic side of architecture, in AAD as well, we were taught to look at other things like novels, papers, even arts. So I was designing a hanging garden for Ophelia, so which is from this painting actually. It was inspired by this painting. So if you're familiar with this character, I'm sure it's a quite famous character. So Ophelia is all about the water, the flowers, and the character itself, right? This was the outcome from that project. So it was this hanging garden for Ophelia, and I have this series of flowers. I was designing actually a hanging garden for her, and using photography again. So this is actually my friend in a bathtub in a cold winter. So I was just asking her like, can you just be like on a bathtub? I know it's cold, but I will just be quick. So I would just have these dry flowers and can be. So it's always interesting to me how you can reimagine things so many times and in your own way. So there's some originality into it. Finding landscape, and the other techniques that we were always exposed was like materials in modern making, right? So coming from a local school, we were just exposed in model boards, all these normal things. But going to AAD, I was exposed into this another level of material selection, And these things, the one thing that I learned from it is actually how you photograph all these models. It's not just about how, like this model, like for example, like this one, is a clay powder material. It was just this small. It was really small. But my tutor always say it's all about how you frame that object, and it kind of brings out a whole new texture to it. That this is quite interesting. So like I said before, my project was about Ophelia and Garden. So my tutor was asking me like, can you somehow freeze or capture the materials of the flowers and the water? So I didn't know how to do that at first, but in the end, I kind of figured out how to use like resin, like when you put resin and then it kind of like harden up. So that somehow kind of captures the flowers. So and then in the end, this kind of becomes my material template. So even in your architecture project, right, you can always create your own material. So I feel that there's always room for more exploration when it comes to your architecture project. Constructing moments. When I did this model, it kind of changed my perception on architecture models, because usually I was taught that architecture models should be like a complete model, like when you design something and then you did the model and it's actually a complete version of it. But when I did this narrative architecture model, I kind of learned that I can just highlighted the things that I want in that model, and then use even collages. Like this one, I use 3D collages. And as you can see on the left side, that material, that my model is really small. So I really like working with delicate models, because for me that works with my thesis back in the days. But it also shows the delicacy in model making. So there's some narrative to it. And you can also, I always encourage students to also play with shadows, because I feel that once you put light and shadows, it just become a whole lot different story. So you can use that technique as well. Architecture language. I think this is what I learned from my thesis, right? For the plans and everything. This was actually the development of the plan for my final thesis. Started it started from on the, as you can see on the left side, it's actually a site plan for my site for my thesis. It was in Cyprus, so it was in Nicosia. So if you are familiar with Nicosia is actually an old wall city, and they actually have like a buffer line because of the war happened during I don't remember, but it was between the Greek and the Turkish. So they have like a buffer war zone, and it's just like 2 meters apart. It's very interesting. So I had the chance to have a site over there. So that was my site for the women's piece. What I did was just for a starting point, right? Like I said before, I always learn from a reference. So I use the site plan as a reference to just get the pattern or the language. Can be a solid or this can be a void, and eventually it turns into like your plan for the project. And I just had fun with it. It was really fun. It doesn't need, I didn't think about scale. I didn't think about size. I didn't think about all the practicality. I just go with it. And it turns out, I think it turns out really nice how the flow kind of, and obviously I have reference from other architects or plans, but the language is there's originality to it. And then even when you do your programs, like for your architecture, like for example like cafe or hall, I wouldn't encourage students to put like cafe, restaurant and hall. Try to reimagine the name for your spaces. Like for example, like for my thesis, right, even for like a garden, I would name it Hawa Gardens, it gives a little bit a different vibe to it, And the other one is moments through narrative section. I have this obsession designing via sections, because I feel like when you do your plans, right, sometimes students always start with plans, but I feel like when you start with section, it gives so much possibilities, you know. So these are just little sketches of sections that I have during my thesis, and it develops into this series of endless of sections drawing. I think I have like thousands of them, and it kind of like developed into the final one, which is on the lower side. So that was like my main section. It was fully hand drawn. I think I've drawn it for millions of times. It was just not one drawing. I keep what the trick was, like I said before, to just keep having a butter paper and keep tracing the drawings. So and then finally it becomes the final product. It keep refining. The drawings keep refined. It gives possibility having like a profile line, and we also sort of imagine what other space could be already. And because when you're designing from a plan, right, most of us would just for early on like lower year student, they would having the difficulty to just imagine how once the plan is being extruded out. So then they wouldn't know what to do. So maybe designing from a section could just change that perception a little bit. I think it's a bit more organic. Okay, moving on. Architecture tectonics. I think for sure, I think I talk a lot about intangible things, narrative, but I also believe the technicality of architecture, which is the construction part, right? So there's always appreciation for architecture tectonics. So we kind of need to see the beautiful part of construction technicity. My tutor was really kind enough to just push me to just see in a different way. Like you can have this really nice exploded drawings with materials, and you can even design your own mechanisms for your project, things like this. So for example, like this project, I have sort of like a mechanism where fabrics kind of open and close. So I even have like a model on the left side, kind of casting the mechanism. And on the right side is actually the AutoCAD version of it, which is the technical side of the project. So there's always way to just appreciate your design. Um, so having said all of that, right, I would just like to summarize how I kind of do my work. I don't know if it's gonna help anyone, but I just want to share the process because I feel like it's important for me to summarize. So most of the architecture schools comes with the beautiful drawing. So normally what I would really always have these sketches. Always have these sketches. It doesn't matter in plans or axonal. Like for myself, I kind of comfortable drawing in axonometric. So I always draw things in axonometric, all these drawings, and then I transfer that through the 3D digital. I transfer all that data into 3D digital. Like for example, like this one I did from that sketch to this. And because I feel like when you transfer that, because this is 2D, right? But when you have that all that data into a 3D world, it gives a little more opportunity to explore. You can have like a 360 of it. So that's just interesting. And then finally the digital productions. You can get line drawings, you can put colors, you can put textures, and then it creates all this very interesting image to help you to explain about your work, right? Yeah, I think that's it from my side.